Hi, this is James Garden at CineTechGeek, and I'm here at BaseLight with Martin Telescal. And, well, we're here today. I'm covering a lot of high dynamic range and the move into high dynamic range. And BaseLight is a very well high end of the color grading industry. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to come here and ask you guys, who are in the know, what's happening with high dynamic range? How do you see it evolving into the industry? What's been done with it today? And what should people who are interested in finding out more and learning high dynamic range workflows, what should they be looking for?
Well, I think we've sort of had, what's interesting about what's happening now is we've had high dynamic range on the input side for a while.
Yeah,
like cameras have been doing it for a while. Cameras have been recording loads more than we can display for a long time. And the big change now is obviously displays are starting to catch up. So what we've been doing is sort of in two streams. We've been doing color science to enhance high dynamic range, which means writing custom display rendering transforms, which convert from a scene referred space to display space, and just does that nice roll off. And we've got variants for standard dynamic range and high dynamic range, and the software automatically switches between them. So grading in HDR is not unpleasant. You simply specify a high dynamic range output, and then it will automatically select the appropriate DRT to use to grade that footage. We're also introducing a new tool at the show called the Base Grade, and essentially that was been built from the ground up to work for HDR footage. So it's very powerful at very powerful tools to compress and move parts of the image data, maintain contrast, and yet move them together and compress high dynamic range into a small dynamic range, or to move specific brightness of parts of the tone curve for HDR.
That's right. Yeah. So this is a very important aspect of describing high dynamic range in terms of the new problems you have when you're doing a high dynamic grade. For example, you can see out that window. And you need to bring that window into the right sort of range for the high dynamic range grade.
Yeah, also it's not distracting.
That's right.
It might have been attractive before, clipped out, but now it's too bright and has to be brought back.
That's right, but it also brings editorial into the grading process as well about how that window will behave when it didn't. Usually they always blow out, so no one really considered that. But now it doesn't. You can make it look like you can really see it as well. So these aspects which you need to take on about your grading. Now, one of the things I've learned from actually doing a lot of talking with people in this industry is that although the cameras can or have been shooting high dynamic range for a long time, it's very much a work in progress, because you really need to talk to your cameraman and how they shoot their content, because I've talked to some people saying, well, that window's going to blow out anyway, so I don't really care what happens. Well, in high dynamic range, you need to care. And so this is the tools that you just mentioned is a very good example of where that is an issue that the person taking or filming the content needs to feed into the grading people using your tools.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, what is surprising though, often you do get stuff which is not shot with HDR in mind. Like a lot of our demo footage actually is a couple of years old, Alexa or Red footage, which was not shot with HDR, but actually can be presented in HDR perfectly well because it was well shot, not too underexposed, not too underexposed. As long as it's so reasonably, sort of puts it in a decent place, normally well exposed place, it's typically usable. But yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously, if you think you're going to need to get that window back, then you've got to make sure you retain it.
That's right. Now, another aspect, because you're in this field, codecs and what codecs you use when you do your acquisition formats. I've been talking to a number of people and there's opinions on, like if you're using an S-Log in a 10-bit container or a ProRes 444 compared to a RAW. What is that compromise using those codecs, or is the data still all there? What's the story with that? So I just want to say, this question is asked a lot because a lot of people are using those codecs today, and when I talked about the HDR, they go, oh, can I repurpose my content tomorrow?
Yes, I mean, typically a well-designed log-like tone curve, like log C, S-Log, some of those Sony various things, the same red log film, that sort of thing. Those are designed specifically to efficiently encode material in a reasonable bit depth, like 10-bit, something like this. So totally you can use ProRes Alexa footage, say, which is encoded in log C, and that does have sufficient information to do useful stuff in HDR, totally. So,
but do you give it using that over using a RAW workflow? What is there a difference? What would you potentially lose if you didn't use RAW?
Well, I think the difference is that with RAW, you have the ability to debayer and change the specific tone curve coming out of the debayer live when you're color grading it. So if you specifically want to change like the color temperature, change all this other stuff can be done as part of the debayer settings. Whereas using something like a ProRes, someone has made that decision on set. They've set the thing. We're just going to use log-C with these settings, and that's what's produced in the log-C into the ProRes file. But I would certainly say doesn't prevent you from using that footage in HDR. It's a very solid encoding, and you can totally use it to great dynamic range.
And before I heard you talk, I've overheard you talking before about how you've released at the show a big new high-end upgrade to get to these new Anglese sort of level of production.
Yeah.
So can you just speak to that for a minute?
Well, essentially, the Anglese Billy Lin project is something where it's being shot in stereo at 120 frames a second at 4K.
Okay, yeah.
So to grade and review that, obviously requires a powerful machine, and so they're using our new BaseLight X system, which is essentially an additional chassis on a standard BaseLight 2, which adds another 6 GPUs and fast storage, it's essentially built to be able to play back that footage.
In BaseLight,
in real time,
all the tools that BaseLight has.
Yes.
In real time.
Yeah.
Finally, I'd like to quickly talk about someone going from. We'll just cut that out. Finally, okay, it's fine. Finally, I'd like to quickly talk about deliverables. What's the story about BaseLight and delivering to, for example, the new IMF standard that's coming along? Is there any news on that?
We don't support IMF right now.
Right.
However, it's something which comes up a fair bit, so we're clearly working on improving IMF support.
Okay, cool. There you go. And finally, anything else you want to add to my conversation for?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things we've launched at the show and showing for the first time is a tool called FreeLight, which is a Mac application, which the basic version of it will be free, and it essentially allows you to deploy BaseLight color science and grading on set. So you can use all the standard BaseLight primary grading tools, and then directly live update a LUT box like a Teradek Color or an IS Mini from Fuji, and you can also control an Alexa camera by directly.
So that's a free tool.
Yes.
Fantastic.
It's the initial version is free, but to control multiple cameras, to control an Alexa and stuff like this would be a paid upgrade.
Okay, cool.
But essentially, you'll be able to download it, try it, and get experience with how BaseLight works and how its color science works. So essentially in that, and that obviously has all of our high dynamic range color science and stuff in it. So, it's be deployed in a very easy to access package.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem.
Martin.
Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too. So this is James Gardner, CineTechGeek at NAB 2016 at the BaseLight stand or FilmLight.
FilmLight stand, yeah.
And just going over all their new features and how they're also driving us into the future of high dynamic range and cinema mastering. Thank you very much, Martin.
Cheers. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.